I am here today with my good friend and colleague, Dr. Tunisha Singleton. And I talked her into this because people ask me all the time, what do you do with a degree in media psychology? And she is doing some amazing things. And so I thought listening to all the amazing things that she's been doing will inspire people about the potential and power of media psychology. Uh, Tanisha and I, well, gosh, we've known each other a long time. I've had the pleasure of co-teaching with Tanisha. We teach media psychology foundations. We used to teach brand storytelling together. And she's also taken her sports expertise and her knowledge of fandom and is teaching a course on community psychology, which is really also taking advantage of the work that she does consulting. Her consulting practice really integrates, I'm going to call this an obsession, this lifelong commitment to sports. You're the only person I know who's been watching, pro wrestling since you were 4. But it combines this knowledge and this fan base and this passion with psychology. And that allows her to focus on fan experience and engagement, the power of community, and all those things in a really interesting and personal kind of way. So let me tell you what she's been up to, and then we'll ask her questions about how she got there. So the first thing you should know is that Tunisha has a podcast called I Have Questions, and other than one rant, she's interviewing this incredible array of athletes and activists who are making a difference in terms of promoting Black voices and Black opportunities. She's the president of the board of directors of the Black Girls Hockey Club, where this organization was created to create access and support for Black, Indigenous, and people of color, hockey players, non-hockey players, but just getting this idea of everyone to sort of participate in defeating systematic racism in sports. She presents at academic conferences. We've spoken on panels together, including one on geopolitics and combat sports. I was not on that panel. Representation and culture in combat sports and pro wrestling. She's also been really active in culture and communications director of Crux XR, did I say that correctly? Which is a cooperative studio that promotes Black storytelling. And in fact, one of these projects premieres at Tribeca. I think that's next week. So all this sounds so amazing. We know each other pretty well. I don't quite know where to start. So you tell me, how did you get from a newly minted PhD, because I've known you since the beginning of your journey, and how do you approach applying media psychology profession?
Yeah, well, thank you for that introduction. And as you were going through, I was like, wait, I did do all that. Okay. But it just seems it's one of those things that, like, thinking back on all of those experiences and everything that has been included in my journey thus far, nothing feels like a chore. Nothing feels like a chore. Nothing felt out of place, and everything just plays its own part. And I think knowing that it's a journey is a big part of it. And for me, I guess, I met you day one at orientation, and I came in and I was like, has anybody talked about sports? I just wanted to talk about sports. Like, that's it. This is all I know. I just talk about sports. Because my background, is in traditional entertainment. So I was doing podcasts. I was radio broadcasting. Everything's a podcast now. But I worked at the on-campus radio station. I was doing film. I did a lot of screenwriting, wearing all the hats that one does in production and all of this stuff. But I was just noticing that the industry was changing, and I wanted to keep up and not be left behind. And I noticed social media started becoming this thing, and I recognized that out of my own fandom first, right? And is that how I was watching sports changed. So how I was experiencing sport changed. All of a sudden, I couldn't watch a game without live tweeting it. I was constantly making new friends, like, hey, let's meet up at this game, let's tailgate. Like, my entire experience was changing. And I noticed the industry itself was starting to try and keep up and say, okay, well, fans are doing this now. So now athletes are doing it. Now teams are doing it. Now leagues are doing it. Brands are doing it, and allegiance and sponsorship with X, Y, or Z. And so that presented an opportunity for me. And I was like, that's where I want to be. And I want to be at that nexus, right? Where sports and society kind of collide. And so I came in there with that in my mind. But what I didn't recognize was, like, how much psychology is all within that. Like, I got a C in psych in undergrad, right? Like I never wanted to, you know, I thought psychology was just like, I thought it was, I didn't know what it was. I just didn't know that it is literally central to everything that we do. And we shouldn't be standoffish about it. But once we just understand that we're looking at the human experience, that's key. That's it. We don't have to think of it as like this big, scary, five-headed monster or something. It's the human experience. We are people. Like we are in the people business. So it behooves us to understand people. And so like for me, once I got that, like, oh, okay, that's what fan identity is. That's what this is. Now I could use that to position myself to be the expert in this space and begin working at all of those different touch points. But I think the big central part for me early on and after I graduated was that, you know, every student I think in every field will have that like, okay, well, what kind of job do you get, right? Like that's what everyone has to answer first when we're talking to prospective students and current students. It's like, well, what kind of job do you get? The fact is, once I realized that media psychology is not the job, right? If you think media psychology is the job, like that's where you first played yourself. Like media psychology is not the job. Media psychology is the perspective and approach to do your job better. Right. So it makes you a better marketer. It makes you a better communications director. It makes you a better blank. So it's not the job, it's the perspective that you take into a job that makes you more advanced and more able to do a job more effectively and efficiently than others. So once I got that, I was like, boom. And from there, it just kind of kicked off into, you know, starting my own consultancy and practice.
That's so awesome. And that's such an amazing point because first of all, people come in as like, well, you know, psychology, isn't that clinical psychology? Or isn't that, you know, what, you know, you're just like running rats through mazes? What are y'all doing? And you're right, it's so fundamental, but people don't see it as that. And because it's got all this, this baggage. But yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you that this degree in media psychology totally transformed the way I think about things, the way I approach problems, and the way I think about all kinds of mediated experience. So, you know, I'm wondering whether or not, as you've been sort of doing this fan space and this last year of COVID, how much you're seeing people try and move to overlay augmented virtual reality, and how reasonable you think that is in terms of the fan experience, or is everybody just going to, you know, race back, grab their beer, and park outside the stadium?
A little bit.
Not that there's anything wrong with that, Mike.
Right? Yeah, never. I've never done that. But I think it's going to be a little bit of both, because even in a lot of the agencies that have approached me over the last 18 months or so that I've been giving insight to about fan engagement and consumer behavior, period, they are very, very curious about how to lean into new technology or an emerging media and these types of things, as opposed to like everyone diving in because they're like, oh, everybody's doing it, we have to do it, you know, out of this like FOMO or something, as opposed to taking a step back. Does this actually make sense for my business? Does this
brands have the worst FOMO of anybody.
Right. And it's like, no, Sherman, you don't need a VR commercial. Like, we get it. We know what you're selling, right? It's like, no one needs to be sold on like, should I buy this? Like, we got that. It's essential. But I think in terms of sports, there have been a lot of different attempts, I'll say, at getting fans to watch a live game in VR. I'm not a giant fan of it. Games are like 3 hours on average. It's such a social experience that when something happens, I'd be like, oh, like I want to grab the person next to me. Like, oh, did you see that Kawhi dunk? Like, oh my God, that was a foul. And it's like, I don't know how I would be able to replicate that in an immersive space. So the considerations need to be about the social element and how interactive is going to be. And so in a lot of the consult that I've done when it comes to immersive technology for sports, it's been positioning these techs as a complement to the experience as opposed to like a replacement, right? So it's like, okay, it's halftime. I'll check out what's in the locker room or the gift shop. Oh, they're in a timeout. Let me see what they're drawing up in X's and O's for the plays to come out. Oh, okay, let me go over here into the owner suite or look what it looks like from here, because I've never been to the Link in Philly. Or it's like, oh, let me look at that. So as a compliment, as opposed to watching an entire Super Bowl, right? Or any type of live event in that space. It just seems too daunting. And yeah, like you said, like people drink. I wouldn't want to, like, how do you do that?
Right.
Like, that just looks bad.
Well, it makes me wonder, and whether you're finding that people don't appreciate the level of social affiliation, connection, identity that happens in a group of fans. In other words, that somehow we're supposed to be isolated. Not first thing I thought of is, boy, talk about hat hair, man,
Yeah.
with it. But how important it is to be able to reaffirm your identity. And I know you've been working hard with people to get them to understand that element of fandom.
Definitely, because it was something that I forgot what we called it, but when we did that media psychology colloquium thing.
Oh, the colloquium, yeah, right.
Yeah,
symposium,
like,
something.
Symposium. Like, yeah,
I think it was a symposium.
Right. And that was pretty early in the pandemic, right? Like that was in the summer-ish. So that was maybe 4 months in. And what I had recognized coming off of, the summer and the, tragic events, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, all of this stuff. And when sports got pulled, that it took the absence of sport for people to recognize how essential it is. And not only, I'm sure, for, wives of girlfriends, like, oh my God, he's always here now. And like, does it, and there's like nothing to distract, that person. But then also from the perspective of like, they have sports and society is always connected. So this whole you have to stand for the flag. You aren't allowed a voice. You aren't allowed to use your platform to speak about social injustices when, of course, 90% of the athletes that are playing these most mainstream sports are of color, and Blacks particularly. Like, how privileged and rude is that, right? To think that they aren't allowed to use their platform to speak on certain things. So I think that intersection and just recognizing, like you said, reaffirming that this has really, really deep roots into our identity. And it's something that I recognized too, maybe within the last year as well. Like, I didn't recognize that, like, okay, PhD, I counted, it's like 22 or 23 years of school, right? From kindergarten. But in counting through all of that, I've only had 3 Black teachers.
Wow.
And only have had 3, and 4 if you include my kindergarten teacher, Miss Mitchell. And so I had Dr. Trisha Rose. I had the legendary Dr. Angela Davis, both at UC Santa Cruz. And then my college prep teacher in high school, Ms. Hill, and Miss Mitchell, my kindergarten teacher. Those are the only 4 Black teachers I've ever had in my entire life. And I recognize that maybe subconsciously, the reason why I love sports so much is because it's the only place I know I could go to regularly to see someone who looked like me succeed and be celebrated, right, and be praised. Sports and entertainment. So it has, when it comes to fandom and affiliation, that is a very huge demographic and cultural trait that psychology, we're getting into how we gain esteem, gain affiliation, and the things that we attribute to our own culture and personality and what makes our vibe and what makes us tick.
That makes me think too about all of the symbolic actions that go on in sports that, as you say, were defined by other people, right? Whether you stand or you sit, some of these are very long-standing rituals, but the importance of being able to establish your own rituals or your own space in a sport, which is not to say that you're disrespecting or it's just a new way of being. And so I think that what you describe is so powerful, which helps me understand a little bit why you would connect with Renee Hess and Black Girl Hockey Club when you're talking about how sports is just a mirror of society. How did you meet Renee?
On Twitter. I saw,
of course you did.
Of course, right? I was on Twitter and I saw like at Black Girl Hockey Club, and she had tweeted, hey, we're going to do a meetup at Staples Center in LA. It's when the Golden Knights from Las Vegas are going to be at Staples Center. It's like, let's do a meetup, tailgate, like get to go on the ice before the game, all that stuff. And I thought it was a troll. I was like, there's no effing way there's a Black Girl Hockey Club. Like, no way. Lies. And so like I clicked the website and then I go through like the profile and stuff, and it wasn't verified at the time yet. And I'm like, seems legit, but it's just too good to, like, no way. So I was like, the worst case scenario, it cost me like $50 or whatever it was. So I give them my money, and then I'm wearing their t-shirt and I'm driving to the Staples Center, and I was like, I know this is going to be fake, but whatever, I've just got to see it, right? And I show up at 10 a.m. outside Staples Center, and there's already 50 people there. Black, nice. Brown, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander, handicapped, veteran, gay, straight, kids, babies, grandparents. It was the most diverse collection of people I'd ever seen in my life, let alone at a park, but at a hockey event. I was like, no, mind blown. And so I was like, where's Renee? And so she was like, hey, it's you. And she's from Riverside. I'm from Riverside. She lives 10 minutes from my parents right now in Riverside. It's just the smallest world. And I was like, I have to work with you. Like, I don't care, like, but we're gonna be working together, just so you know, kind of thing. And cut to now I'm the interim president on their board of directors. And she created it. It started as a tweet. She was traveling in Dallas and was like, does any Black girls like want to watch the Stars game together? Anybody? But a bunch of people just started tweeting her. It was like, hey, I'm in Philly, I'm in Philly. And so it just started organically showing itself. And through relationships that she had in hockey, she kind of was like, hey, I wonder if I should just make like a club. Like, should I make it? And then they, of course, were like, yes, do it. And then now it's become a licensed nonprofit out of California. We give away scholarships 3 times a year. Yesterday, we did a Zoom call where we congratulated our 14 winners, where we each gave them $1,000. And wow. 3 times a year, we give away $5,000 to $500 to offset the costs, because hockey not only is the most expensive sport to play, but now we're also talking about the cultural tropes and the narrative and like that toxic narrative that's just around hockey culture of it being a white sport. There's a handful of Black players ever. The first one ever is Willie O'Ree. And so right now, actually, the NHL has nominated Renee and Black Girl Hockey Club for what they're calling the Willie O'Ree Community Hero Award. So we actually find out today if we won or not. So we're not sure. It was Renee, Black Girl Hockey Club, and 2 other finalists. But it's just recognizing that there is work to be done. Not only, and there's just, I've had a lot of horrible experiences when I try and watch hockey and stuff. It's like, turn that off. Like, why are you watching this white sport or this, that? And so there's a lot of war stories that Renee and other members of our club can attest to. So this was really an organic, like, for us, by us, and really just being supportive. And I launched just this last month. It's our leadership development program. So not only do we have our scholarship program to give to our Black women athletes, but I recognize that in wanting to change the culture of hockey, that needs to be done off the ice as well. Right. 1, because maybe someone can't skate like me, but 2, when we're talking about diversity and equity and inclusion, we're talking about photographers. We're talking about the broadcasters. We're talking about the color commentary. We're talking about the executive suite, hockey analysis, business development, all of these things. So we've launched our program, and we're integrating we're onboarding actually a couple of our mentees right now. And we have mentors from not only Warrior Sports, which does all the equipment and apparel, but also executives from the San Jose Sharks and a lot of other leagues and brands affiliated with hockey. And so I'm just really proud that I'm helping change the narrative, and by telling these girls that they have a chance, and it's not just that representation thing, because they don't see it, right? Like, I didn't in school. I never thought I would have been a teacher or anything, but there are those subliminal, like, well, I guess this isn't something we do, and there's just a lot of that negativity around that. And so I'm just really proud that Black Girl Hockey Club is in that type of position now, where we can help seed some implemental change a little bit at a time when it comes to on the ice and also off the ice.
Right. Yeah. And as you know, a lot of the work that we've done in media psychology talks about how important that an experience here is in terms of your whole life. So you're not just changing the hockey narrative for these young women, you're changing the way they tell the story of themselves and their opportunities for success, or their just putting it in the, in their vision at all, that their dreams can be made real. So I think it's just remarkable. And I just think it's absolutely amazing that you meet people on Twitter, that you've managed to develop this. Do you think is that a sports thing?
No, I think I've gotten more jobs and leads off Twitter than LinkedIn, but I mean, it's back and forth, like if anybody looks at my timeline, which I probably don't recommend, but I go from posting articles that are very, very, scholarly and having intellectual conversations to, that was a foul, it was a foul, and live tweeting a game. So it goes, it depends what day it is, because I can really, really go like that. But it's amazing. I have met so many amazing people off of Twitter and just online in these digital communities, and a hell of a lot, obviously in this last 18 months or so because of the pandemic. And these are folks that many of them I still haven't met yet. They're across the country, across the continent, but they're valid. And I wouldn't say that somebody that I met off Twitter is less important than someone I went to college with, just because it was in IRL, like in real life, right? That doesn't matter. I think there's this digital currency, right? And I think it's about value. And that's something that I started to understand too, because the psych element of okay, what do I value? What do I do to feel a certain way, to satisfy a version of myself or a concept of myself, right? Juneteenth is this Saturday. What am I going to do to, really feel empowered and liberated to celebrate this? What am I going to do when you wear these different hats, right? Father, daughter, sister, mother, dog owner, all of these things. We do separate things. I call it that identity filling station, right? It's what do you do to pump yourself with? And that could be music, food, what you wear, how you do your hair, what virtual background you want to put on Zoom. What are you feeling right now, right? And those are all very, very conscious decisions. I think we don't give ourselves enough credit for how much control and power we have and agency over our own decisions. And once we step back and be oh, I do control that. I can change the channel if I don't like something. I can dress and, listen and feel a certain way. And that's all some things that I've learned in this journey and through graduating in this program. Because it's also something that doesn't change. As soon as I graduated, I didn't stop learning. This stuff, it's a mindset. Right.
No, I've actually probably learned more since I got my PhD than I did getting 100%. It. Well, because you don't have the context, and for both of us, we learned all this theory and research, and now we're trying to figure out how does that make sense of this communication or that brand or that. So what came first, Twitter or the podcast?
Twitter definitely came first. The podcast, I think I've been on Twitter for probably 10 years or something, but it's been one of those how often am I doing it and posting and stuff? But the podcast is something that I always wanted to do. Radio was always kind of my first dream job, actually. I remember I got one of those Talk-A-Boys, the toy from Home Alone, and where you put the cassette in and you change your voices and stuff. That was the best gift I ever got as a kid. And I would run around and I had this it's Toon Talk, and I would just bug my brother and my parents and friends and neighbors. But then I saw radio was on TV, with Howard Stern. And I was wait, so we're watching radio on TV? This whole media convergence thing? I was what? And I remember I wrote something in high school. It's dream job. I was I'm going to be the female Howard Stern, and I'm going to put a white guy in a cage like he had Robin. And I'm just going to talk crap about dudes and their jock straps and whatever, and then just talk about pop culture and stuff. And they're Tunisha. I was
no. It was oh no.
They're we failed
this girl.
Yeah. show them, right? But I don't have that, but it's something that I always wanted to do. And then I kept seeing everybody pop up with podcasts, and it was one of those things, like I got really kind of like sad and depressed and like pissed off and imposter syndrome and all of this stuff. And then I was like, what's holding me back? Like, why am I not doing this? And so I was like, you know what? Screw it. And my brother bought me a microphone, and I was just like, I'm just going to hit record and see what happens. And I have questions is something I always just used in text and on Twitter whenever I saw something questionable or weird. I was just like, I have questions. Like, so I just ran with that, got a logo and played around with it, and took, a couple of weeks, and I was like, actually less. And I was like, okay, yeah, I'm just going to hit record. And Renee Hess, the founder of Black Girl Hockey Club, I was like, you want to be my first episode? She's like, duh. And hit record and hit publish on Anchor. And I am so glad I got out of my own way and started to do that. My second season is starting actually this weekend. I'm joining 19 Media Group, which is a whole podcast network of independent content creators and stuff. And we're all about like amplifying voices together. And it's amazing. And I've used the tag where culture and conversation collide for my show. And that's really what it's about. And we're talking about the human experience. We're right. Talking about not only sports, but other fandoms. I interviewed an erotica author who has a lot of fan fiction and stuff. I've interviewed someone who has a nonprofit for mental health advocacy in sports. I've talked to authors in combat sports and pro wrestlers and everything in between. But it's been amazing. So, and I'm glad that I did Twitter first, because that helped me have kind of a built-in audience of folks that were already familiar with me, that have now, has since supported my show.
So do you, when you invite guests, do you have a purpose? Is it somebody who you think is promoting a certain kind of message or a certain kind of value system or model of success or something? I mean, how do you make those choices?
It's definitely one of those things, like I don't just pick what's trending or what's going on currently, like at that time. It's definitely something that when I'm considering a guest, I'm like, what's their voice? And what are they about? Like one question I ask everyone is, what do you do to stay safe, sane, and entertained? Because I think those are three separate things. Things I do to feel safe, right? And now we can get into like Maslow and stuff, right? But it's like, what do we do to feel safe? What does that mean? Like community, home, comfort, something that's very individual, right? And then sane, it's like my bubble has gotten this small, right? Like people and friends in my community and stuff. So it's like, what do we do? Like, how do we relax? What's self-care for us, right? And it can be very, very different tonight than it was yesterday. And so when having that awareness, and then entertained is just, I want to try and bring some fun back into these things. And sometimes we have to get uncomfortable, which is one of the campaigns from Black Girl Hockey Club, because some of us aren't allowed to have fun because we have to deal with systemic racism, or we have to deal with bigotry or discrimination or any of these things. So we have to get dirty sometimes, but what can we do, or what can I do as a professional to even just try and create dope experiences? I just want to do something to continue to let's bring some element of joy. And that's why I think Audre Lorde and a lot of other radical Black feminists and stuff had said joy is a radical act. That's because it is. Like, there's enough nonsense and sadness out there that will take our priority of like what emotion we're going to be having. So to still be joyful in spite of X, Y, and Z, that's a very conscious and radical thing that we have to activate emotionally. And those are the things that I think about when I'm trying to pick a guest.
That's awesome. And, to make a little sort of academic sidebar here is that one of the things that we cover in the foundations class is positive psychology in media and the way that media can create positive emotions. And so what you're doing with people when you're spreading that joy, radical act or not, is you're changing their body chemistry. And for all the people who are listening and who experience that, they now, are building that upward spiral of emotion, more resilience, more optimism. And so when you're talking about something like the Black Girl Hockey Club, where you're trying to give people a vision of success by spreading joy, you're actually equipping them to climb over the hurdles. Even though that seems so counterintuitive, just making somebody happy, how can that do any good? But it in fact changes how you see yourself and others. So, I mean, I think that's really remarkable. And you do an amazing job. It was funny to listen to you, because I mean, we've usually, when we're talking, we're at least see each other on Zoom, and like, wow, that voice, that's a really good radio voice. Cause I don't ever separate, you from your voice. So that was really cool. I know with some of the consulting work you've been doing, work is sort of in the immersive arena, but I'm really curious about how that works with, is it Crux XR? Am I saying that correctly?
Crux.
So what do they, I understand that they're collaborative storytelling, but I think you need to explain it, because that's about the best I got on that.
Sure. Yeah. And that's something else that I found on Twitter. That job was from, there's a group called POC in Tech, People of Color in Tech, and they post job opportunities all over technology, encouraging Black and BIPOC professionals to apply. And so I saw that there, and I was like, And so when I looked up Crux, and yeah, it's a worker cooperative, so it's all like kind of employee owned, and our co-founder is Lauren Ruffin, who I am just continually in awe of, and it's out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. And Crux XR, it's started as just an opportunity for other Black creatives in XR, being mixed reality, to showcase our own work, to give each other support, share resources, grants, job opportunities, all these things. But we've been very, very fortunate to have grown exponentially in being a hub for just creativity. And so being this type of visionary studio, it's like we're full of XR and VR directors themselves that work primarily in this, immersive audio, all these different types of things. So we have a range of different clients, from Spelman to Creative Capital to the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts in San Francisco. And we're helping them not only in just mixed reality or immersive technology, but also just that different approach in how do we tell stories. And we're impacted about liberation. And we're also just very, very socially conscious. So a lot of the work that we do is primarily on creating content, traditional or immersive, that has some type of civic engagement or social justice level. So like POV, for example, that you mentioned in the intro, that's at Tribeca right now. So anybody in New York City, there's actually going to be a community pop-up event that's free at Brick in Brooklyn in New York City. And so check out the Twitter and all that stuff to check that out. And it's also, you can check it out on virtually if you're not in New York City. So until the 20th, you can still see POV. And what that project is, it's a sci-fi virtual reality experience that talks about predictive policing through drone surveillance and drone technology. And so it's really looking at predictive intelligence and how AI, algorithms of oppression and these types of things can really impact communities at a disproportionate level, especially when it comes to people of color. So this VR series is awesome, and couldn't be more proud to have been a part in producing this. Alton Glass is the director, and his company, GRX Immersive. So those are like the types of things that we like to do that have that type of social impact in this. But we're totally rooted in just making sure that we have a space for Blacks and creatives that are in the immersive XR, VR, AR space, and traditional storytellers as well. And we have a great digital community, like about 200 folks all over the planet that I help manage. So if you just go to community.crux.black, you can see our Mighty Networks, which is our digital community that I help monitor, where we just share a lot of resources. I host a podcast for them as well called Cruxcast. So we've been able and very, very fortunate to talk to like Kamal Sinclair, Jessica Clark, who co-wrote Making a New Reality Toolkit. So it's all about how do you even start? How do you even begin entering the immersive technology space? And one of the great things that they brought to our attention is that when everyone's saying diversity and these types of words and stuff, but what that actually means, other than just the, swatch book approach of like, okay, make sure you have all these different complexions, but it's also a diversity in approach, right? It's diversity in who's in the room. It's diversity in thought. Can this be done a better way? Are we considering other perspectives? Like how, so it's thinking about being open at all aspects of creating media and how in any way that looks. And so that's a little bit about Crux, and we're growing, and we're really happy that we're here.
Well, VR is a perfect metaphor for shifting perspective, because as you were talking, I was thinking about traditional storytelling, and with all these mixed realities now, there's opportunities for storylines that aren't constrained. So if you're talking about how do you share a new voice or a new perspective, there's some really interesting opportunities in these spaces where you're trying to navigate the ownership of the story by the user, or versus the environment set up by the storyteller. So I think that it must be fascinating to watch people work through that process.
There's even another project that just came to mind called Ali Summit that we co-produced with ATL, which is the Actors Theater of Louisville in Kentucky. And one of the projects that we helped create with them, it's called Ali Summit. And the director, Idris Goodwin, who's amazing, I interviewed him on the podcast as well. But what he did was he wanted to tell the story about Muhammad Ali, but from the position of all the other athletes that supported him, not at first, when he declined to go to Vietnam. And so they had this whole summit. So Jim Brown of the Cleveland Browns, like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, all the other huge prominent athletes were like, because if he says like, what type of presence, influence, the significance, like, hey, if we start, saying no, or so that whole kind of environment and space and mentality that shifted those ripple effects across all sports and across all Black men specifically, right, at that time. So Ali Summit is something that is also available right now if you go to ATL's website. But he created that experience because he wanted to see he wants people to feel what it was like to be in that room, right? To be in that room with all these other huge athletes and thinking about the context and the environment like at that particular time. So you're very right in that the linearness of it and just being able to put yourself in an experience to start to get empathy and different perspectives, definitely one that you leave differently than you entered. Well,
and it's so important to give people different perspectives because it makes it safer. In other words, it isn't like there's a right and a wrong. It's like, here's a perspective and here's a perspective. But my God, Ali was very courageous because all those, big names weren't visible, because there was no social media. So he was just sort of up against mainstream media, staking his claim.
Very hated. Yeah. Not all, it's funny, you can buy an Ali shirt at Target now, but back in the day, like people, like he was hated, stakes that his life were made, his family. And it's funny, a whole nother conversation about how that stuff kind of shifts in terms of like pop culture and things. I saw like a Tupac shirt at Target and I was like, really? Or like if Bob Marley knew he was at Hot Topic, I think like he'd be rolling over right now. But that's a whole nother discussion. But it is when we're talking about the estate and legacy, like that's brand identity. That is like, what do you stand for? You see a symbol, you instantly think of something else, like what it represents. And so those are perspectives and that I gained from, from being here and going through this journey and this doctorate, because it's all, again, just so relevant because it's the human experience. And that's what we're focused on. That enables you to be a better marketer or director or storyteller or professor or anything that you want to be. Like there's nothing that doesn't tap into this aspect of the human experience and media psychology, because it's, again, the people business. So we're not selling and talking to robots, it's other people.
Right. The Black Girl Hockey Club is a perfect example of the way that technology and media have changed organizations. You know, it's flattened them. It's allowed people to talk across levels, you know, to each other, that have tremendous ramifications when it filters back into mainstream.
Mhm.
So of the stuff you're either doing now or have done, not counting your dissertation, because I know that was a ball.
Yeah.
What's been sort of the most interesting or meaningful thing that you've done or that you're thinking about?
That's a good question.
I mean, I know, you know, having a class with me is, you know, a real high point, but
totally the toppest of shelves. That is the goose of of experience, no doubt. You know, the stuff with Black Girl Hockey Club is really, really meaningful. And I remember it was last term, so we were giving away our winter scholarships, and we gave one away to a 12-year-old girl in Kenya. And so I had to get up at like 4 a.m. or something to do the Zoom because of the time change or whatever. And I was just dragging ass, and I didn't want to do it. I was just like, and got up and got out of bed and turned on Zoom. And this girl and her family just started weeping because we gave them $5,000. And wow. It just helped me remember. I was like, this is our why. This stuff is immediately impactful. You see observable change immediately. The parents come on and tell us that no one else has ever told them that they can do it. They're the only Black girl on the team. What that looks like, being the only a lot. And in a sport where there isn't even a lot of representation that can showcase that this can be your space. Mm-hmm. That is an immediate reward and shot in the arm of just joy, because it makes everything worth it. Like, that is our why. And so when I always think about the sport experience, and I don't just mean, you know, foam hands with the number one and tailgating, I love all of that stuff. But I just want everybody to be able to enjoy it and have a good time and be able to remember it. Normally I'm in my office, but like we started, I can't assemble my chair. But I've got my WrestleMania lunch pail from elementary school. I have ticket stubs tacked on my board that I remember where I instantly go back to where those were. And I have the t-shirts and jerseys signed and autographs, and every single one of them teleports me back to like that moment. And I just want to create more moments. I just want to create more memorable moments that are meaningful and something that is observable. Because when we give away those scholarships, I instantly see it, and their parents are so gracious and humble too, because, you know, kids sometimes it's like you don't want to believe your parents because they always say the same thing. But when a stranger says the exact same thing, then it's a little bit, it's like, see, I told you, like, it's a little bit more validating somehow when like a stranger comes on Zoom and it's like, I'm so proud of you. It's a thing. And that's really probably, you know, that's the meaningful part and like the most memorable and why I love doing this. And I feel the most equipped to help do it and make that type of positive change in this space. And it's definitely because of my new way of thinking that I gained from this program.
Yeah, because when you talk about having a meaningful experience, there's a lot of psychology that goes into that. That sounds so easy. People talk about, engagement or, experience as if it's just like this
it's like
thing.
Define it. Like, what does it mean? Yeah, it's different for everyone.
Well, and also you just talked about all these this sort of symbolic connections to, you know, your life history or your personal narrative, or however you want to explain that. We can use all kinds of psych terms. But, you know, your perception, your mental models of what matters, the way you relate, you know, to space, whether or not you feel presence, whether or not through identification or representation, or just the quality of the narrative you actually feel experientially involved. I mean, all of those things, at least for me, and, you know, I know we share a lot of the same feelings. There's these that they're so empowering in terms of how you look at an audience response.
Definitely.
You know, and how you think about, you know, when you say I want them to enjoy it, well, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you want them to take away something that makes them more.
Right. Right. And it's in thinking about it, going back again to like, okay, immersive technology and how do we use any type of technology, you know, in sports or in branding and all of these experiences is I try and always look at it as a utility, right? These are utilities to an experience. We're using Zoom as a utility to be able to broadcast or record and have real-time engagement. It's not to replace human connection. It's to augment it. It's to strengthen it and enable more. So I don't look at these things as like the devil or something that's, you know, just totally eradicating human connection. And it was like, or it's allowing me to have more connection. You know, is there toxicity? Is there bullying? Is there all the horrible things? Absolutely. And there's that on the street too. And we haven't fixed that either. So and we're even then. All spaces will have that stuff.
That middle school hallways were probably the biggest location of bullies, you know, in the Western Hemisphere.
Absolutely. And so, yeah, and like looking at these as utilities and tools to help create new experiences and stuff, it should always, at least me, be founded in that, all right, how can this enable someone down the road to, you know, to have a better experience, you know, and NFTs and all these other collectibles and all of this stuff. And it's like, all right, but if I can't tack it on my board, if I can't make a new filter to put it on my Twitter, you know, avatar or in my banner or something that acknowledges and gives me that immediate transaction of value and feeling seen and that I've contributed to Clipper Nation or whatever it is, then I don't want it. But I have to have that seen feeling. Like I have to feel seen. I have to feel a part of it.
Oh, that's awesome. Ignacio, did anybody have any questions before we just ramble right on to the end? Tanisha and I have been known to talk for a really long time.
Totally could do it.
As of right now, I don't think we have any questions.
No, anybody have any questions out there? All right, be that way. So, you know, you're doing so much stuff. Is there any, you know, I always think I have this sort of the baseline theories or baseline approaches to how I think about audiences in the work that I do in entertainment. So do you have a sort of go-to framework, or where do you start when you start looking at an experience?
That's a good question. I think my baseline is I always try to look at it from, okay, is this in home? Is this at a venue? What's the deliverable, right? So I always try to start at the end, right? Like what's the end going to be? And I try and work backwards from there and then try and sprout some of these other touch points in as you'll recognize, like a very kind of transmedia way, right? Where there's opportunities for like deeper dives and the timeline aspect of things. And so I'm always I'm always considering, he was my external reader, you know, Joe Pine for my dissertation. He's the co-author of a book called The Experience Economy. And he very much is still very, very active in the consulting space when it comes to brands and stuff. And I always remember one of the core pieces of that book was saying, you know, products and services can come and go, but experiences are what last forever. Right. And so true. And I think I'm always thinking about that, and not necessarily a model, but I always just think of that concept. And I'm always thinking about, from a psych perspective, like just social identity too. And making the curriculum for community psych, us and them, the science of identity is like the core read that we have in that course. And considering the tribal nature of how, you know, group membership and us in group, out group, all of those things kind of happen, I try and map out the evolution of that. Right. And so very much like I did the evolution of like sports media consumption, from like telegrams to newspaper to the Olympics and 30 of the, you know, down on the line. So also thinking about like, okay, well, how has community what's that evolution look like as well? And so whenever, a couple of times when agencies have come to me and like asked about a different brand experience, especially coming out of, or kind of coming out of the pandemic, but where does that kind of fall in line, and what behaviorally will motivate someone to participate, particularly when they're still, okay, do I want to go to a game? Like they say, it's kind of like they have sections for those that are vaccinated. Right, because then it's like the honor system, right? Because like they're not checking. So behaviorally, motivation is always that model that I try and consider, or the concept is something I always try and consider, that in the context of a community experience as well, because pros and cons, especially now, it's going to be very, very different moving forward than it was in the past. In the past, it was like, okay, it's expensive. Like, is this a playoff game? Like, or is it, what's the value of the game itself, as opposed to just, you know, personally or socially? But now there's so many other ramifications that need to be taken into consideration. So it's very intersected right now.
Right. So many hurdles to that decision that it's so much more complex than it was. I think, you know, we saw that in the movie theaters too, is, you know, it's like, you know, especially when you have a mental model, and I think sports auditoriums are the same thing, or stadiums, that your mental model is like sticky floors and, you know, spilled beer, and, you know, right. And so it's like, okay, so I'm going into an environment, I'm going to sit next to somebody I don't know, and it's not clean. Right. I mean, whether it's clean or not, I mean, but it's like, that's, you know, as a kid, you know, the movie theater floors are always sticky, or the Hell Club on Saturdays. So it's you know, what this whole dynamic of how do you communicate safeness, or how do you offset the need for safety with the offer of affiliation or camaraderie. And so this is really interesting.
Because then people have to define for themselves what they value and rank it. Like, do you want to go to the game that bad? Like, is seeing the playoffs like more important than your health and safety if you aren't back? Like those types of things. So it's that all goes back into like the consciousness part. It's like, yeah, you are in control of these things. So we rank what we value ourselves, and so we have to take accountability in that, responsibility for that. And so that's all a part of those types of decisions. And the fact that every city and state is different, because some have, you know, capacity issues, and some have full and none at all. And then there's Texas. And so it's just like whatever you want goes. And so it's hard. It's very, very hard for brand. Like, people are figuring that out. But it's interesting too, because I brought up to a colleague of mine in combat sports that we were talking about like different cities, and it was like, oh, well, there's, you know, Milwaukee, and it's like, okay, well, is Giannis going to stay? Or it's like Portland. Okay. And I'm like, well, look at what we just did. Like, we call them markets. We didn't call them cities or communities or towns with people and diehard fans of said town because they're born and raised there. We just call it a market, because New York may have more money and opportunity, and LA and the Bay Area and Chicago and Miami, those are hot markets. But it's like all the other small towns and Midwest and all these types of things, it's like or at least, you know, mainstream can belittle them and devalue these other communities just because it's not a hot market. And it's like,
it really objectifies the fans, doesn't it? It really, I mean,
it does.
It's kind of like traditional audience segmentation, right? It's like, oh, you're, you know, 18 to 24, you're something. It's like, it's like all the same.
I don't matter. Like, we're not just stats and figures and ones and zeros on an Excel spreadsheet. Like, these are people, you know, and like, that's all other just perspective things that people forget to consider. And those are ideas and things that I've at least tried to bring into every conversation that I have with executives, brands, and agencies and such, when just trying to consider these types of things. Because I'm like, have you thought about not calling them a market? Because that's, you know, like, they pay taxes too. Like, they count just like everybody else, but it's, you know.
That's awesome. Tunisha, I can't thank you enough for joining me today. I know I twisted your arm to get you here, especially in the middle of your move, but I really value all of the conversations we have, even if we're supposed to be lecturing the students. It's mostly you and me having a pretty good time. Hopefully they have a good time too. But I hope that you all who are here listening can see the richness of what media psychology can do, and the number of applications that it has once you start understanding the theory and build it back up. Because what Tunisha's been talking about are some pretty profound and impactful things that are really based upon her knowledge of understanding what motivates people and what satisfies people and what drives their need for identity, and all of these things that are so pivotal to who we are. So you all should come.
I can't thank you enough as well. I think it's always fun, and there was no twisting of arms. It's like, you tell me to be somewhere, I'll do it, because I wouldn't have graduated without you. That's for damn sure. So any success that I have, it's definitely a credit and a pat on the back to you, because you helped.
Oh, well, you're very kind.
Fuel me here. Definitely.
Well, thank you, and thank you everybody for coming. Anybody have any parting words? For anybody who's here, you can contact Ignacio if you actually want information about the programs. If you want information about all the cool stuff that Tunisha is doing, she is T Singleton Says on Twitter. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. And TunishaSingleton.com is my website, where you'll see a lot of the Black Girl Hockey Club and other things that I've got going on the website as well.
Yeah, that's pretty fun. And that's where I got to listen to one of your podcasts, marveling, going, whoa.
And I have questions, podcast.com too. And yeah, everything's kind of from there and on Twitter.
Awesome. Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. Thank you, Tunisha and Ignacio.